people. I'm seeing representation, I think, from almost every synagogue, if not every synagogue in Orange County. It's really just so wonderful. It's such a lovely way for us all to connect and come together during this Omer period. And I know many of you were on the call last week with Rabbi Shinder and really enjoyed learning with her. And now we are so grateful and happy to learn with Rabbi Lerner.
Thank you, Rabbi Rubenstein. I really appreciate it. I want to tell you, I was glad that there are some men on this call. For a second, I was going to be very worried that it was only going to be women, and my worry only in that it's, if I'm from my male perspective talking on Rahav is important to make sure that it's not just me, and so I'll begin with the caveat that it's obviously I'm speaking from a male perspective on what does it mean, who is this Rahav, excuse me, and who is she in our literature, and how do we understand her today? It's especially in today's world. It's almost seems counterintuitive that I would be doing a presentation on it. Rather, it should be someone like Rabbi Rubenstein offering her thoughts on it. And so I will do my best. And I certainly at the end I invite commentary and your thoughts. So if you have thoughts and you want to chat them in, that would be great. Just type them in, and this way I can look at them and we can answer them later rather than throughout the presentation. And so, and the other caveat is we are talking about prostitution, and sex workers, sex trafficking, and so I will be. I limited myself to one joke. I decided that of all the jokes I was looking at, none of them were appropriate. But there's one that's on the edge of being horrible that I was going to share with you, and I'm gonna keep you in suspense and wait till there's a moment and how bad this joke is. But it was tons better than all the other jokes on prostitution that I could find. I how can you make fun of prostitution? You really can't. It's really very hard. But if people will make jokes about the Holocaust, it's not funny. But we're Jews. We laugh at things that we instead of crying. So I think that comes with the territory. So all as in preface to talk about Rahav in our tradition. And she is an unusual character. She is a Gentile Canaanite. She is the first time we meet her is in Joshua chapter 2, and it's when Joshua is with all the Israelites on the other side of the Jordan waiting to come into the land. And instead of coming as a whole right away and attacking, he sends a couple spies over, and they go to the house of the Ish Zonah, the woman of harlotry, right? And whose name was Rahav. And so they dwell there, and the word they use, shachav, is the kind of like they laid there, not the usual one where you would say someone would have spent the night. This is, and the rabbis note on this that this is a strange use of the term. More, and I enjoy the midrash on that they were enjoying the other parts of the house that were a part of it. We'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. So they stay there for the night. They're spying out the city of Jericho, and the next day, or whenever it is, the king comes and questions Rahav, and where are these men? They're coming to destroy us. And she says, well, they were here, but they have left. And considering she's a harlot and a prostitute, it is not unusual that people would come and then leave. So I don't think he was suspicious of her at all, especially since she says, and they just left the city. You should go get them. And so they chase after them. Meanwhile, she had hidden them on her roof. Underneath the flax, apparently, you would have a roof and you would dry your flax, or however, for whatever reason, you would store your flax on the roof, and she hid them underneath it. It's and before that, she was bartering with the spies before the king came. Before she hid them, she said, "Well, if you're coming this way and I'm going to hide you, why, not, she doesn't ask in the text, but why should I hide you?" More along the lines, instead, she says to them, "I know that the Israelites are the people of God. I know we have been made aware. I know what God did for you in crossing the Reed Sea. I know that Adonai is your God. And therefore I will protect you. Please protect me in the process." And so they agree that if indeed they live through this from being attacked, that they will make sure that she and her parents and her brothers will live. All she has to do is tie a red string around her window. She lets after the king leaves and after they chase after them towards the Jordan, she lets them down via a rope so that they can escape. And when we come 4 chapters later in chapter 6, we again, Joshua makes sure that Rahav and her family escape with not only with their lives, but also with their possessions, and that they're able to live. They camp outside of the Israelites. That's the story of Joshua in a nutshell, and not necessarily in a straightforward manner. But you have Rahav. You have this person who Isha Zona, this woman of harlotry. And it's interesting. My first thought whenever I've read this was she was a prostitute living with her parents. I mean, think about that for a second. Well, and not even living with her parents, just living with her parents, but also her brothers. She's living with her family. They know what she's doing. And there isn't a morality that says she's a horrible person. Rather, she's portrayed in the Bible as righteous because she not only hides the spies, saves their lives, but is saved afterwards. And if and the literature, if you look at it, is reminiscent of two parts of the Bible. If you look at Shifra and Puah, who are non-Israelite midwives who were commissioned by Pharaoh to murder babies, and instead they lie to Pharaoh, and it can almost be comparable to Rahav lying to the king when he comes pursuing the two spies, because they saved their lives. Different, obviously different in weight, comparing murdering babies versus the killing of spies, but it's still there's that parallel. There's also the parallel, I think, between Rahav in a different way with Tamar, who essentially, at the end of the story, when it comes to Tamar, she prostitutes herself to her own father-in-law in order to have children by him, by the family. And in the end, she's seen as righteous as well. So you have this idea throughout that the prostitution is normative. Not necessarily accepted, but normative. Now, cultic prostitution throughout the Bible is forbidden because of the practice of idol worship, because it was part of their cultic practices. But there is there's the difference between, cultic prostitution, which would be, they would be temple prostitutes and they would be part of their religion, versus, dare I say, I had read this about secular prostitutes. Like, people just want to have sex, right? They don't want the religion part about it. They just want to make sure that they're all set. And we don't know necessarily that she's not a cultic prostitute, but there's no reason to say that she isn't otherwise engaged with it. History has an interesting way of changing the facts with Midrash. Midrash tries to explain it away. The rabbis were, arguably uncomfortable with Rahav and her job as a prostitute, and so they thought, well, if the spies are coming to stay with her, maybe she's really an innkeeper. And they used a part of the word of not only the phrasing of the Bible and the words, but also in what is a zonah. And it could be maybe there's a correlation between zona, which is the word for prostitute, and mazon, the word for how we understand hunger and feeding and the like. Always, and so they say maybe she's a provider of sustenance. And so that's how she maybe came into the idea of innkeeper. I'm of the mindset that, well, that only just further justifies the idea of her having a brothel more than anything else. Because where else are you going to be able to service your customers without rooms and the like? Anyway, like I said, not the most comfortable of discussions, but important for our discussion here. So Rahav becomes this person, this almost to an understanding of a righteous Gentile in this very strange way. The Talmud says there's a couple things that both the rabbis and the Talmud says, which make us sometimes both more uncomfortable and trying to justify it. So it says that the Talmud says that she began her career at the age of 10. I don't know how they got there, and I don't know what to think about that. It's really quite horrible. The rabbis say that she was one of the 4 most beautiful women in history, along with, and these 4 women were Sarah, Abigail, and Esther. Okay. In fact, the rabbis also said that if men were experiencing impotency, all they would have to do is call out her name. I feel like this is like Jumanji. And instead of you calling Jumanji, you call out Rahav, and all of a sudden you're not impotent anymore. I don't always understand the rabbis. So you have all this happening with Rahav. And the Midrash goes on to say that because of her righteousness, because of her protecting the spies and ensuring the Israelites' victory in Jericho, that she was basically rewarded. And the Midrash says that she married Joshua, in fact, and that her descendants were both kings and priests and prophets. So, like Jeremiah and Hilkiyahu and so on, and Yechezkel and Ezekiel, excuse me. So that we have you have an interesting pedigree of the people that come from Rahav. Now, what is interesting to note is Christian tradition looks at, and I'm going to say Rahab for her, or Rahab in how, if you're not Jewish and you're not pronouncing it, says that she married, what's his name? Salmon, and it's Salmon. And that she is one of the descendants, after Ruth, of Jesus Christ. Which to me is interesting, that one of the descendants of Jesus would be a prostitute. God, I don't know what to say about that, but it is fascinating. So she has this rich history, and we, of course, know that the righteous prostitute, this is probably its origin. We've seen this in modern movies and cinema, right? You've seen Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts as Vivian. Perhaps even a more famous one of contemporary of that is Les Miserables and Cosette, right? Wait, is it Cosette or... Oh, I always forget which one. It's the other one. It's her mother. Um, I knew I got it wrong, and I'm like, no, it's... What's her name? And I just don't remember. Les Miserables. It's the woman who dies and her daughter's in care. She who eventually resorts to prostitution in order to keep her daughter alive. This is not, and she's considered righteous, right? Because this is what's left of her after everything else is gone. And so something I want you to keep in mind as we push forward is, how do we understand prostitution today, in today's world, modern era? How do we feel about it? And this is something I do want to give us a discussion on, because, of course, it's mostly illegal everywhere, except for a few places. And my question is, and in the same way I feel about drugs, I believe it should be decriminalized at the very least. I'm also of the mindset that prostitution should be, at the very least, decriminalized. And I want that to be a discussion that we have, because when we look at the world today, we're in an interesting world, and unfortunately, there's a lot more to that discussion, and we'll get into it. I think it's time for the joke as we're transitioning, because it's always important to have a good joke along the way. So this one is written on theworstjokesever.com, and it's a good place to have a joke. And it says, a guy meets a sex worker in a bar, and she says, "This is your lucky night. I've got a special game for you. I'll do absolutely anything you want for $300 as long as you can say it in 3 words." The guy replies, "Why not?" He pulls out his wallet and takes $300 out of his pocket and lays it on the bar and says slowly, "Paint my house." Like I said, it was the best joke on there. Everything else was horrible. Anyway, so you ask, how can you make fun of prostitution? That's the best way. So, listen, this is Rahav is a fascinating story of who she is, and I think I was talking with some of the rabbis online in on Facebook, and someone said we need to do a modern midrash on it. I'm like, go for it. I want to see it, because in my picture of Rahav, I see her as the main matron of the brothel in her home. She lived on the wall, and she obviously would accept visitors, and she was obviously the one in charge, because we don't hear about her parents. We don't hear about her brothers, excuse me, except to say that she saved them, essentially. We know that she saved the spies. Are we talking like a one bedroom, 1 room house? I don't think so. At most we're told that where she lived was on her place of residence was on the wall of Jericho. We don't know whether that meant on it or in it, but at least there was a window to it, because that's where she lowered the spies from. We know that she was to tie the red string, so do we imagine bars in the window? Probably not. It was probably an open window. Where did she tie the red string? I don't know. Of course, it's interesting with the red string, because the red string harkens back to the Exodus and the blood on the lintels and saving the children then, and this red string saves her. And there's that correlation of saving people from that angel of death. And it's thought that both this instance and the one in either, I'm forgetting if it's Numbers or Deuteronomy, when they're having the second set of twins, they're not Jacob and Esau, and I'm forgetting their names. When he brings out his hand They want to know which one's the firstborn, because you need to know that in Jewish genealogy, like who gets the first portion. It's always the firstborn, and they tie a red string around the baby in order to do it. Its red string has been known as a protector, and so this is that second instance of red string protecting, and it's been used by Kabbalists as a way in which to say, well, that's why we tie the red string around our wrists, and it will ward off evil. Sure, I'm not much into superstitions. But that's where some of its derivations come from. And if you're in Israel and you see people hawking, and hawking is the correct word, their wares of string, they say that they've wrapped it around Rachel's tomb, and that's what gives it its power. Sorry, I have a hankering against a lot of superstitions that I find problematic. Now, if you wish to understand its history, and then have the red string saying, I remember Rahav, I remember the children, and I remember Sarah, and let it be a reminder of those who came before me. It's not an amulet of protection. Then I'm okay with that. I like things that are reminders. I like symbols. I think symbols have power, but not in the superstitious way that, oh, if I knock 3 times, then, or close my door 3 times, that'll keep evil away from me. It's a distinction that I find important. So, with all of that said, now, all of that is like the basis of who Rahav was. And if I miss something, I do invite my colleagues who are here to please either add, correct as you will. This is just from what I've been reading. There, it speaks to who she is, and how she is in our tradition, and how we understand prostitution. Because the rabbis, oh yeah, I was reading this with the rabbis, which I found both disturbing and enlightening at the same time. That the rabbis said it's okay. It's not that it's okay, but it's not wrong if men seek prostitutes. This is in our history of the Talmud and so on. It says it's good. Men should seek prostitutes instead of masturbation, because at least then you're not doing it to let go of your seed. It's in an actual person, because masturbation apparently might be worse than sleeping with a prostitute. I'm not so sure I understand that, but so you might see people. That's how they say it's okay. At least, I guess the lesser evil, as it were. But I think it's important for us from Fontaine, thank you. I wasn't looking at the check. All the way back to Les Miserables. Anyway, so I think it's a good point to pivot to how do we understand prostitution today, especially with sex trafficking, sex workers, and so on. And the first thing that should be noted, which is the unfortunate part of that Israel is on the list of worst offenders of allowing sex trafficking. And that is quite unfortunate. They're on tier 1. And not everyone unfortunately, is on tier 1. They're fighting and combating sex trafficking in their midst. Maybe some of it's because of how Jewish tradition treats prostitution in general. But I think sex trafficking is, if there is, I want to make a distinction between that sex trafficking and prostitution, because there are so many horrible things about prostitution, which is one, sex trafficking, essentially female slavery, from a very early age, from kidnapping and an inability to decide your future, and essentially to a life of servitude and slavery until you're used up, as it were. Sex trafficking is taking you away from your home country to wherever you're going to go. And then you essentially get trapped because you can only, maybe you don't speak the language. It is a perfect way in which to trap someone if they're unable to communicate to even the basic people about how to get by. And that's an important distinction. Oftentimes, prostitutes are, as you well know, they won't talk to law enforcement because, well, they're prostitutes. What they're doing, their very livelihood is illegal, and they can easily go to jail. It's one of my reasons for wanting to decriminalize prostitution, specifically because it makes it very difficult for them to have any support. And it continues that the cycle of entrapment and slavery. Besides which, if you have some form of legalization of it, at least maybe they have access to better health care. With, of course, the one of the primary countries, the Netherlands, which has a way in which that it's both legal and there's healthcare associated with it, which allows them to be able to be normalized, at least limited. And of course, they're in the quote unquote red light district. Now, I'm not saying red light district has any correlation to the red string of Rahav. I'm not saying it isn't. In fact, there are other things along the way that maybe. One of the things I read about in the 16th century was how they would put red on the lamps so that you couldn't see the prostitutes so well. So if they had acne or pockmarks or boils, you couldn't see it as well with the red lights. I am not kidding. This is what I was reading about prostitution along the way, and that could be it's possible. I think more plausible origin than the red string of Rahav, because if the prostitutes were reading the Bible, they necessarily maybe wouldn't have chosen prostitution as their livelihood. I say that and I don't mean it, because it's not there's not a correlation between that. So you have countries that will do better, like the Netherlands, and will do far worse in Israel. And my argument is that I believe it should be decriminalized and made legal because of that very fact that you can have better regulation with regards to health, a better ability in which to give women an out that maybe they didn't want this career, but you don't trap them with people, then they can't leave. And I know the Netherlands are far from perfect, but I think it's at least a better choice. Especially when it comes to STDs and the like, and it allowing that to be a part of people's opportunities. It's not, and you have it's and as well as age. I think the age for prostitution in Netherlands is 21, and that you can only do that after that age, which also is a good thing because it's a clear line of saying we're not going to have child sex workers among the people. And I think that once again provides a measure of safety for people. I don't. It's along the lines of, to me, the ethic that people there will always be poor among us. There is not an eradication of poverty, rather there's an alleviation. There's a how can we make people's lives better in the meanwhile, and I offer that with prostitution. There isn't a saying that this will be. There is not an ending to this, but rather we can make it step by step and stage by stage better, in my understanding. Um, and I think it also one of the things I'll go back to Rahav, which doesn't necessarily have to do with it, but I think the idea that is put forth in Rahav and Julia Roberts and Fontaine is that we often judge people according to what they do, and it's if they don't have an opportunity to get out, they'll have to do the job that allows them to live. That doesn't prevent, just because that is their livelihood, that doesn't judge them on who they are in essence and the core of their being. And I think we oftentimes spend too much saying, "Oh, yeah, he's a rabbi, he's a doctor, he's a lawyer," but we have so many other positions that says it's not about what you do. It really is about who you are at your heart, what you're willing to put out there, about how you can be a good person in this world. And there are many ways in which we can do that. And I think Rahav is a good instance of saying, and especially in the Bible, that you can be a good person even if you are a prostitute. That is not your that does not qualify as a way in which to say, well, obviously you are bad because you're a prostitute. So so I'd like to invite discussion on sex trafficking and the like, and give me your thoughts on on prostitution. Let's stick to prostitution, especially since sex trafficking, I think, in its very essence, is evil. So
I want to say that I was going to say those exact same things about why it should be decriminalized, at least because of the health care. And then I thought about taxes, and that if they were actually working and had social security numbers, then they could provide for their futures and pay taxes. The same thing with drugs, in the same vein, that now that it's being decriminalized, and if it's being sold, then there'll be taxes on it, and it would be to the benefit of the state or whatever. And
Wendy?
I want to say also that when I had my children, my mother put a red string on their crib, and I'm sure everybody here will agree that either they did or their mothers did the same thing. So, and now I know why. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I to kind of piggyback off of that and to go back to Rahav, perhaps her family lived with her as opposed to she lived with her family because she was the breadwinner. And, you know, maybe she was the first female entrepreneur, you know, in the Bible. So, but that's what comes to me, that a single woman had a job, didn't, you know, wasn't high in society, but to your point, she had a job and she was earning money. So maybe that's a, you know, a different perspective.
Excellent. Rochelle?
Yeah, I think it depends on who your pimp is, because Abraham and Mordecai didn't find it too bad to turn over people that they really cared about for, well, one to save his life and the other one to save her people. But there seems to be nothing wrong with that, especially Abraham didn't do it just once.
Of course, it's interesting that both Abraham and Mordecai, both Sarah and Esther, are considered two of those four women that are the, you know, in rabbinic tradition, are the most beautiful women.
Yeah,
And who is Abigail?
It doesn't excuse them.
I am not excusing them. Abigail, if I recall right, is one of King Saul's daughters. Correct me, Rabbi Rubenstein. You know, thank you. Wasn't she also then David's wife? One of, yeah. And wasn't she the wife that where he was dancing in the streets and she was calling him out? Am I in the right wife? Anyway, Abigail is an interesting figure in rabbinic in the Bible. So that's where she comes from. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you explain a little bit more about this religious or sacred prostitution as a practice?
Sure. Cultic prostitution, though, I will just if that's the only type of prostitution of in that way. So cultic prostitution was some of the fertility rites of the Canaanite religion and some other religions out there. Basically, temple orgies. That would be, you know, their fertility rites in order for both to have children and quite honestly, I don't know, you know, well, I can assume why they were doing it, but that's one of the things that was forbidden by the Jewish religion. But to it, I can only explain it as they'd be like, from what I remember, temple orgies.
And who was allowed in the temple? Just men.
Well, I imagine if it's like
Must have been a
prostitution in.
separate room.
I don't imagine they had separate rooms. I imagine it was both women and men. Those were the ones that were that were protected that worked for the temple, and I imagine they were women and men, and those that were just the regular people coming in and doing what people do with paying tithes in order to support that prostitution. That's my guess. I don't know much about cultic prostitution. I have not researched that. I don't want to know more. I want to have my imagination, well, limited. I don't want to think about it because that's just it. Yeah.
No, but if it was forbidden, like did the books at all explain so like what exactly was forbidden, or they just assumed that people knew and they just said this action is forbidden?
I'm if I recall right, it's simply forbidden. They didn't go into details as how it happened. They kind of said in cultic prostitute we don't have cultic prostitutes. And that was forbidden. That's my recollection. Like I said, that wasn't part of my research today, so I don't know the details of that. I apologize. Certainly, once again, I ask my old rabbi friends of mine if you know more. By all means, chime in.
I find it interesting that there's all that talk about prostitution, and yet there's very little said about who's in the bed with them. Seems like it's okay for the men
Now,
paying for it, but not the women.
I think that was part, and quite honestly, though, I don't recall it being particular to a gender, in the sense of that's why homosexuality was banned in the Bible. I think because of it was a part of your cultic prostitution. If you think about it, it's really all of it is related to that in so many ways. That's if you think about Roman orgies, as it were. I don't think it's too different in its essence.
Regarding the red string, do you think more people? I've always heard in reference to Rahav.
Did I say Rachel? Whose tomb did I say?
You did. I think you did say it was.
Okay.
I'm still kind of like confused how it kind of got tied into Rahav.
Well, Rahav, it's specific that she tied a red string around her window in order for the Israelites to recognize, to not destroy her home, and to make sure she and her family, her parents and her brothers, got out of there. More of the question is, how did it get to Rachel and her tomb? Which Rachel is definitely, she has a few. She had fertility issues, and that's why she wanted the mandrakes in her story. I don't recall her having red string as a part of it, any part of her story. But she is considered one of the main matriarchs. She's the beloved of Jacob, mother of Joseph and Benjamin, and so you want to I guess if you're going to have an amulet, you want it to have the symbolism of hearkening back to Rachel of all of them, who seems just she has a tragic but sweet life, and she's the one that implored God and her husband, I want children, why aren't you providing me? And Jacob's like, what are you talking about? I obviously it's not me. and gets upset with her. But she's the one that, if you're looking for a reason, you want to reach out to her, who especially needed protection in her life. I guess I really don't know why Rachel's tomb.
Rabbi, can I chime in here?
Oh, by all means on that
Right.
one.
Well, I certainly am not a biblical scholar, so I cannot tackle the subject from that perspective. But I guess I have some concerns about your perspective on legalizing prostitution. I would question how well the prostitute will do under that. Prostitutes are like our friend in Pretty Woman. I think historically prostitutes are taken advantage of. And a fascinating book, if you want to read, is called The Third Daughter. And The Third Daughter is written by Talia Karner. And she talks about in her book prostitution in Brazil and in Buenos Aires. And historically, if you go back, prostitution there was legal. And it was run mostly by Jews, men who went to Europe and got women to come to the New World, and in fact were trapped into prostitution. It's a fascinating book, very hard to read because of its honesty about the world of prostitution. And thousands of Jewish women were taken from Europe and became prostitutes in Brazil. I got involved and I read the book because I am a family genealogist. And I've been trying to find a cousin who we have lost track of, who I know went to Brazil. And there is a sneaking suspicion that she might have been trapped into becoming a prostitute in Brazil. And that book was part of my research.
Well, I think you bring up an excellent point. That there are absolutely issues with legalizing it. It is a very difficult line, but I do want to make sure I did say sex trafficking, which is especially bringing women and trapping them in prostitution, is evil at its core. So I like to say that I did say that. But I also want to say that there are, and because most of the time the idea of prostitution it's banned because of because of morality, which people don't like the idea of having to pay for sex, and so we make it illegal. But I really think that there are better options than criminalizing it. That's why I try to use the term, try to make the subtle difference between legalizing and decriminalizing. I don't necessarily know what the difference can be for it, but at the very least, I want it decriminalized. Because then you make it impossible for anyone who's in prostitution to find any legal help through the police, because their lives are illegal. And so, if at the very least we decriminalize it, we give them options that they currently do not have. Very similar, to my sentiment on illegal immigration. Because we make it illegal, they are by them very existence criminals, and they can't seek out any type of formal help. So
I just
anyway,
want to
but
say,
thank you.
I read that book also, The Third Daughter, and I found it fascinating that it's part of our Jewish history that we really don't know about, that
Right.
I never knew about. And at the end, I think you'll see also how they say the government was involved, and then later on, was able to stop these this from happening. But it is a very interesting book.
Thank you. Lucy, your hand was up for a second.
No, thank you. I'm good. Nope.
Okay.
I don't want to cut off the discussion because I know people
Yeah.
are really interested and people are really enjoying this. And I want to thank Rabbi Lerner. This was really interesting, both from a biblical perspective and connecting it to modern day and a really important issue in our modern day. So thank you. These are I hate to cut it off, but these are meant to be little tastes of Torah that whet your appetite and hopefully encourage you to continue learning and to continue thinking. I'm sure Rabbi Lerner would welcome anyone to any of his classes that he's, I'm sure, teaching on Zoom. So thank you so much, Rabbi Lerner. Thank you so much to Sharon for, as always, being our tech guru for this and for many of our activities. And I hope that people will join us next Monday for another lovely Bissel Torah.
Thank you, Rabbi Rubenstein. Thank you, Sharon Ball. Who was
You're
our tech
welcome.
person?
That would be me.
Thank you. I appreciate everything.
And we'll share
Sharon?
the link.
Thank you,
once,
Rabbi.
to the
Sharon?
recording.
Sharon,
Yes?
I just want to let the Rabbi know, I did read something on here that the string is associated with Rahav because she's considered to be the eternal mother who watches over children. So that's what it says on this one.
Ah,
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did promise you that I would. This is
Oh.
one that I named.
You want to
hold
see
on,
a
I'll take
mouse?
off.
Or, I think it's a
I
mouse.
have 3 mice and they're the charmed ones. And I rescued them from a lab. And this is the one who I named Rahav. And she really is quite
Alrighty then.
feisty. Yes, you are.
Oh,
All right,
boy.
well, it's my husband's birthday and we're going out to dinner, so I'm going to end this meeting.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Be well and take
Thank
care.
you, Rabbi Lerner.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Enjoy,
Thank you.
Sharon.